Stand up. Everyone in the room, up. We're gonna play a little game because I think you need to wake up a little bit. It's a drinking game, but don't worry, you can drink later. So this is not a game to age shame anyone because I have already been like age called out like 9 times this morning. It's ridiculous. So I'm gonna be playing this game with you. Everybody who has been doing something with computers at all, computer security, computer programming, anything like that, for 5 years or less, sit down. Okay, 10 years or less, sit down. Wow, there's a lot of old timers in the room, just like me. This is perfect. 15 years or less, sit down. 20 years or less, sit down. I want you to start looking around at your peer group over here. These are your drinking buddies. These are the people who will commiserate with you. 25 years or less, sit down. Are there any people? Yes. You guys and I are going to hang out at the bar later. Thank you guys so much. I'm not going to go any further. These are the people that are your peer group. So everyone sit down, be seated. Thank you so much. I want to thank the conference for having me for a 2nd year in a row. This is really this is an exciting conference for me. So considering I have 19 minutes and 20 seconds to distill the last 3-4 years of my career into this talk, we're going to get going. I'm going to talk a little bit about an SDL, how bug bounties fit into them. What Ryan was saying at the beginning was actually not true. I was never against paying for bugs. My former employer was certainly vocally against paying for bugs, but I'm actually going to walk you through the case study of the bug bounty programs that I started at Microsoft when I used to work for them. I have since left. I work for a company called HackerOne now, which is a vulnerability coordination and exchange platform, which also happens to host bounties. But the platform itself is about vuln coordination, and it's free. So we're going to talk about getting started with your SDL and your vuln coordination program, and if you are ready, where a bug bounty may fit into all of that. So who am I? I've been doing this for a very, very long time. I had a previous career before this that involved molecular biology. We are not going to talk about that, but we are going to touch a little bit on not just the security development lifecycle, where bounties and vuln coordination actually fit into this, but we're going to briefly touch on some standards work that I have also done, aka masochism, as I like to call it, where I've worked on creating standards for vulnerability disclosure, vulnerability handling, and worked with some of the top folks in the industry over the last 7 or 8 years to create these things. So this is a picture of me that was taken by somebody who may be in this room right now, Pellis, if you're in the room. He's one of the speakers who's speaking later, but yeah, there he is. He took this picture of me. We actually took a series of these photos, and this is me, one of the artists formerly known as @Stake, doing a penetration test, and actually the pink television, because it was a television because it was an online gaming pen test, so I actually had to play some video games. The pink TV and the pink hoodie were basically brought into the @Stake office to troll my office mates as I did this. Thank you so much. But the reason I have this in here is it's a reminder of a pivotal point in my career where I learned something called organizational empathy. So my martial art that they assigned to me was I think it was Krav Maga, which is funny because Captain Steve actually does do Krav Maga, but they didn't give him that one. I would say that if I were to pick my own martial art that I mythologically know how to do, it's Aikido. So it's more of using the forces that are flowing through and the energy and redirecting them. And that, to me, was about organizational empathy. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time describing all the different security development lifecycle philosophies. You're all familiar with writing secure code, designing it from the beginning. We'll go through some of that and how it fits in with bug bounties. But those are just some resources. To me, the name bug bounty is actually it's a false categorization of what is truly just an incentive program. You are creating an incentive for whatever you want. Buy whatever you want. It doesn't actually have to be individual bugs all the time. That just happens to be this sexy alliterative way to put it. So another thing that I've heard that's kind of a misnomer or a misstatement of bounties is that they can replace all of your penetration testing. They're way more cost effective. There is a time and a place for getting specialists under contract to look at things that you don't necessarily want to open up to the world. And that's where a penetration test comes in. So it's absolutely not a replacement for penetration testing. You cannot replace it wholeheartedly. And it's playing whack-a-bug if you're not actually feeding your bug bounty program or your vulnerability coordination program results into your security development lifecycle. So here's a typical SDL, right? So you've got your design phase implementation, your verification, your release, and then afterwards, your vulnerability response. So this is whether you write your own software, which is most commonly how this is implemented, or if you essentially write software that runs on the web. If you have a website, this is also applies to you in some manner or fashion. But I call your attention to the ones highlighted in blue, verification and release phases. And this is essentially where you will see where a bug bounty or a vuln coordination program might fit in. So during verification phase, you're doing some penetration testing. This may be internal, this may be with the help of external folks, but you can also do an invitation-only bug bounty program. And there was a program like this that was running at Microsoft for quite some time, well before any of the public bounty programs. They were different from hiring a pen test company. It was hiring individual researchers who had a knack for finding bugs in specific products. And you just wanted to hire them, ideally as full-timers, but for whatever reason, you know, whether it was geographic or just some other reason why they couldn't move to Redmond and they couldn't join the team full-time, you'd get them under contract. So that's essentially a variation of an invitation-only bug bounty program. You're paying individuals to find bugs, but in a creative way and probably earlier in the life cycle phase. Then I mentioned these ISO standards that I've worked on. So ISO 29147 actually began before I joined Microsoft in 2007. I was asked to work on it and find out what was going on with it because I had written vuln disclosure policies for Symantec and for Microsoft. And so originally, that was, well, it was always a labor of love. It was finally published along with 30111 in early 2014, and not that many organizations know about it. But essentially, these are standards that 29147 is about vuln coordination and vuln disclosure. And it essentially says two things. Have some way for people outside your organization, whether they're friendly hackers, or customers, or partners, or basically anyone who doesn't work for you, to contact you with potential vulnerability information. So have a front door. That's number one. Number two, have some meaningful way to give advisory information to affected parties, whether that's your affected customers or it's affected upstream or downstream, you know, in your software supply chain. Anybody who's affected. That's 29147. 30111 is everything that happens in between. So from receiving a vulnerability report, so all of the investigation, the triage, the remediation stuff, everything you need to plan for when you actually need to respond to a vulnerability. The unique thing about 30111 is that it not only covers vulnerabilities that are reported from the outside, it also actually covers vulnerabilities that were discovered in your own internal testing, because you're going to have to go through some kind of triage, some kind of root cause analysis, some kind of decision around how to remediate and properly mitigate this issue. And that's 30111. So even if you have no external facing anything that you're worried that someone from the outside might need to tell you about a bug report, which is highly unlikely. If you're on the internet, you'll probably need this at some point. But even if you don't, you'll always have a need for 30111, which is the investigation and decision-making process. So finally, let's look at the green. And that's essentially when you're executing your response plan. You've released your code, you've updated your website, and you're ready to go. And what's in green is essentially where either straight vulnerability coordination, meaning have that front door that's easy to find for someone on the outside to report an issue to you, that's where that occurs. That's where all the communication with that outside party occurs. And then if you are at a suitable level of maturity, that's also where a public bug bounty would occur. Okay, so these slides are beautiful, and I borrowed them from David Rook of Riot Games. How many of you are familiar with League of Legends, Riot Games? Yes, so David Rook runs their application security response, and he actually went through the exact same thing that I just went through in super dry format horizontally. He went through with these beautiful pictures vertically. So the whole point here, besides looking at the beautiful art of League of Legends, is to say that not only did David Rook and League of Legends, they have been successfully running an invitation-only bug bounty program on the HackerOne platform for several months now, but the fact of the matter is that no matter how good you are at all of these steps, in terms of trying to reduce or eliminate as many security vulnerabilities as possible before release, no matter how good you are going to end up with the sad little child mummy of vulnerabilities. So this is a sad little creature, and you will always end up here, no matter what. So what are you going to do about it? Let's talk about the case study of Microsoft's bounty programs. So Microsoft had famously been quoted as never wanting to pay for vulnerability information. At the time, why should they? So many people were coming forward for free in exchange for the currency that has been depreciated, which was 12-point Arial font in a bulletin, right? It was bulletin credit. That used to build folks' careers to be credited that way. And then there were third-party vulnerability brokers like ZDI who were buying the vulnerabilities and then handing them to Microsoft for free. So again, it seems strange for Microsoft to start paying when they already had, this gravitational attraction of researchers already looking. They had researchers coming for free. But it was all about that organizational empathy and me being able to understand what I want to do, which is to start some vulnerability incentive programs. How will that mesh with what Microsoft's goals were? So Microsoft's goals at the time were learn about residual vulnerabilities after the security development lifecycle as soon as possible. And also, something very important, learn about new mitigation bypass techniques. So not individual bugs per se, but a technique that can be used to defeat all of the current platform-level mitigations that are designed to make every exploit brittle. The community goals wanted to engage directly with the research community. Remember those hackers under contract that I used to pay to find vulnerabilities in things before we had bug bounties? Well, how do we find them anyway if they never come forward because they don't want to come forward without a bounty? So this was a way for us to entice more of those special eyes. And then finally, the most sophisticated goal that we had was to disrupt the vulnerability market itself. And I'll talk a little bit about how we did that. So here were the 3 bounties that were originally launched. I think the tally right now is over $300,000 paid out. Mitigation bypass bounty, that was for the technique. That's $100,000 per new mitigation bypass technique. Those are rare. Those are purchasable in a way that meaningfully affects the overall security of the platform and everything that runs on it that takes advantage of those mitigations. Blue Hat bonus for defense. The first ever claim, a partial claim of this $50,000 prize actually went to ZDI. They got $125,000 total just about a week and a half ago, I think, because they successfully came in with a new mitigation bypass technique and came in with a defensive idea that would help protect against their new bypass. So again, this isn't a bug bounty. It's an incentive. And then finally, the IE11 preview bug bounty, and we're going to go into this in depth. This graph that you see is the actual graph that was used to convince IE to pay for their own bugs. So what you're seeing here in blue is actual data for vulnerability submissions during the IE10 beta program, followed by a big spike after IE10 left beta, after it was released to manufacturing. Kind of the worst time ever to get a big spike of what these bugs were, which were critical vulnerabilities, meaning critical or important class, bulletin class vulnerabilities. So why was there this big spike if everybody, nice researchers were coming to Microsoft for free? Well, because there were no incentives. If Microsoft fixed a bug during beta, there was no bulletin. There was no 12-point Arial font. So there were no incentives during that period. The other markets that trade in many different vendors' vulnerabilities, including Microsoft's, weren't really buying in beta either, because why would they invest in something that might disappear by the time the full version release was ready? So that was why you were seeing this very low volume of issues coming into Microsoft during the beta period. So the yellow line is the projection that if we created an incentive at the beginning of the beta period, one, we were the only buyers in town. So there was no deal of having to outbid any other market players because nobody else was buying. This is a structured incentive program. This was a way to empathize with the organization and figure out what it is that would be attractive to them and create this win-win situation between them and the customer. So results, actual results, 23 total submissions, 18 bulletin class issues, including 4 sandbox escapes. 6 of these issues came from a researcher who had never reported anything directly to Microsoft before, had only gone through ZDI. So there was that community goal that we talked about. Anyone want to guess how much was paid out for 18 critical or important issues in Internet Explorer latest version when this program launched? Anyone want to guess? I had you all standing a minute ago. You have fallen asleep. Okay, so how many of you know how much those bugs go for on some of the offense-only markets? 6 figures? Yes, you've all heard this. There have definitely been a lot of reports that they go for 6 figures apiece. Do you think we paid 6 figures for those 18 bulletin class issues? Nope. Paid around $28,000 total. The average payout was $1,100. So yes, if you create an incentive at the right time and you understand your market, you can absolutely get the results that you want. So this was the first $100,000 check I wrote to James Forshaw. We're going to speed through some of this because I see my time. Like I said, distilling the last 4 years or so of my career into 20 minutes is quite a challenge. But first and foremost, if you are investing in security and you're thinking about doing a bug bounty program because it sounds sexy, sounds like it might help you control your pen testing costs, think again. You actually need to invest most heavily in your security development lifecycle. You need to feed the data back in to your SDL, setting your goals. And your goals for your SDL should be reduce and eliminate as many, not just individual vulnerabilities, but entire classes of vulnerabilities as soon as possible. Your vulnerability response goals, the stuff that happens at the end after you've released, should be to learn from the community and your mistakes. Yeah, I still have 3 minutes. Finally, yes, thank you. Finally, focus on your own strategic goals. For Microsoft, there were some pretty selective goals for that environment. You need to know your own environment to be able to focus. So there are some resource slides that we've got in here, but operationally, expect an initial spike of reports, whether you're starting a vuln coordination program from scratch or you're starting a bug bounty program. Consider some outsourcing, but long term, you want to build these relationships with the researchers yourself. The last thing that I really want to say about this, in terms of your goals, here are some things to try at home. So if you want to focus on securing your newest products, consider bountying in beta, in latest version only. If you want to disrupt your adversaries, and you know enough about what they do, consider bountying new techniques, new ways to attack, whatever it is that's important for you to defend. So remember this diagram, and remember the fact that no matter how well you execute your security development lifecycle, you will always end up here at some point. And the absolute last thing I want to say is that we have been talking a lot about policy and the law. There's been a lot of talk about the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act in the United States, a lot of talk about the Wassenaar arrangement and the new export controls on technology that has to do with surveillance, and worrying about protecting legitimate security research and vulnerability research. And the call to action that I would have on you is that because even having a bug bounty program does not protect security researchers from being criminally prosecuted, at least in the United States, and there are similar laws elsewhere, is that if you are a part of a company that benefits from security research, that employs security researchers, that you need to talk to your legal representatives about carve-outs for these laws that allow for people who wish to come forward with security vulnerability information to do so without fear of imprisonment. And with that, yeah. So if you have lobbyists, if you know people who have lobbyists, and especially if you are one of these companies, these mega corporations that have participated in the vulnerability coordination space this whole time, show your gratitude. Keep your friends out of the big house. Thanks.